got. Nice camber plates. These come preload already set on there. I'll show you guys how to set the preload in the rear. Got some tools, a few adjusters, some stickers, air freshener. Rear springs and rear adjusters. Front set. And got a rear in here, and then some rear shocks. And these are soft. These are 7K front, 8K rear. You could see here on the spring 008 is 8K, and on the strut, so you have 007. And the reason why you want a little stiffer in the rear is due to the divorced spring setup and the geometry of the e30 arm. It winds up the leverage from the arm winds up taking some of the leverage from the arm winds up taking some of the spring rate out of the spring, for lack of better words. So you want the rear sprung a little bit stiffer than the front. And this is just a street car, so didn't want anything super crazy. Wanted everything to still be comfortable. Here is the rear shock. Nice heavy duty upper mount on there. And I'll show you how to set the preload on these rear shocks, which a lot of people do incorrectly. Make sure all the nuts are on here. There was one or two that loosened up in the box and were bouncing around, but make sure everything's on there. We got two, and on the front we've got everything perfect. Alrighty, and that's it. Everything that's included in there. Nice little plate frame. And I think that is everything. That's it. Now, normally you would also have the tubes, which need to be welded to the front knuckles, which you could order pre-welded, which is exactly what I did. So they weld them over there at CAtuned, ready to go basically. You do have to get wheel bearings, which you could also order. I'm sure you could probably have them press them on as well, but the problem is if you have them pressed on before you put the shield on, you're not going to be able to put it on. So unless you're running with no shield, which I actually have on that car, which isn't a big deal, unless you're running with no shield, make sure you just order them, and then you'll have to either order a new shield or take it off the old one. And that's it. So we got a pair of those. And let's see, we got the other one here. There we go. Nicely welded, good to go. There's some plug welds on there as well, which is a nice touch for a little extra security. A lot of people think that this knuckle is like cast steel or cast iron. This is actually forged steel, and it welds very well. So there's no concern about the welds having any kind of issue. And then let's get to installing. Alright, so I'm going to show you how to put in your new coilovers. Now this already has a set of coilovers on here, but install is basically going to be the same whether you have stock suspension or not. If you have girling calipers, you're going to have a 15 like nut over here and a 13 millimeter bolt that runs through it. If you have ATE calipers, you're going to have I think you're just going to have an Allen head, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong, and I'll just check my car and just confirm that. So loosen those. You could zip the whole caliper off as well. I feel like it's sometimes a little bit easier just to do it this way versus taking those other bolts off. Okay, favorite tool right here. Zip tie or something, it's a good idea to take this caliper and hang it up instead of having it rest on the hose. I'm gonna go get that. Okay. All right. So we're gonna get the caliper bracket off now, which is a 19 millimeter hex on that. Okay, that's off. Now the rotor, there's a Allen head screw in here that is just like a just holds the rotor in place, so it's easier to install the lug bolts. It's not required, but otherwise the rotor would rotate when you're trying to install your lug bolts, and it becomes a kind of a pain. So normally that's a an Allen head, but someone had already, it looks like they slotted it because it was stuck in there. What I like to use is this guy right here. When it is stuck, it's a hand impact, and basically you put it on there and hit it with a hammer, and it'll spin the end, which will usually loosen this without stripping it. In this case, I'm lucky enough that this probably wasn't on there very long, so everything is pretty easily removed. Maybe on the other side we'll be able to use that, we'll see. So that comes off. And now we're going to remove there's a ABS sensor here, which I'll remove in a bit, but we're going to remove this wheel hub so we can remove this dust shield. If you have new dust shields, then you won't have to remove the hub. I don't have new ones, so we're going to just pull that out and reuse it. What you're going to have to do is knock this cover plate off. If you don't have a new one, try to keep it clean. And just keep working it. There we go. There's a little tab right here, which is holding that nut in place. Just gonna knock that back. Okay, that's unbent. Take this hub off. 36 millimeter. Alrighty, so now we're going to get a 3-jaw puller and pull that off. Alright, so we're going to just take this off. It's got a kind of a junk socket on there just to space it out a little bit, make it a little bit easier to remove. And there you go. we're going to take off the ABS sensor here. And that uses a 5mm socket cap screw. And let's see how, okay, good, not even stuck on there. And that's it. Next we're going to take off this tie rod, 17. That might vary. Some aftermarket tie rods might have different sizes on them. So, what you might notice is that might spin while you're trying to take it off. That happens sometimes. If it does, just put a jack underneath there, and that will fix that issue. I'd say while you're doing this, replace it, but these are fairly new, so I'm not going to do that. If you don't have this tool, I would say get one. Pickle fork works okay if you're replacing the tie rods, but if you're not replacing them, having that tool is super handy. In general, the tool is super handy as is, so it's just a good tool to have overall. And what you're going to do is thread this nut back on a bit just to not damage the threads. This goes on under here. Make sure it's seated. Alright. So that goes on there. And boom. That is out. Let's again get this tool on here. This is really good for these things because it doesn't break any of the boots. Be careful with it, which is why it's very useful. Alright, put those back on and let's see how this cooperates. And that's out. Okay. So that's out of there. You could try to get it down, but also a good idea just to take this sway bar link off real quick. Uses a 13, though again that might vary depending on the brand that's on there. Alrighty, and that's out. Alright, and now you got this. You got your old knuckle and coilover in this case, which would be a spring if you had stock. And now we're just going to unscrew the top and drop right off, and that's it. And we're going to get rid of these CX Racing, which these are actually, looks like they're 10K fronts, which is why it is very stiff. I mean, in general, they are super, super bouncy. To be honest, anything would be better than these. I really like CAtuned, but, you know, even if you don't buy CAtuned, don't buy CX Racing. So you've got your old coilover out. This is a great time to replace any worn parts. The control arms in this case are fairly new. Everything's in good shape. Sway bar links are also fairly new. Bushings aren't bad. Tie rods are new, so I'm not going to replace any of these parts. It looks like he's got it's running offset condor control arm bushings. So again, I'm not going to replace all that. If you were doing this on a car that's you know, pretty well worn. Replace your control arm bushings, replace your control arms, sway bar links, sway bar bushings, inner and outer tie rods. Great time to do it. Also a great time to replace your brake pads and rotors and stuff like that if you needed to. So now we're gonna measure the old one in this case and match it up to the new one, because the ride height was at a pretty good level. If you're running stock suspension, it's going to be up to you where you want it. You are going to need to get in alignment, as any change in height is going to affect your toe. So be sure to get in alignment afterwards. All right, so once you've got the top hat caught, tighten up those nuts, and now it's basically the reverse of disassembly. I'm just gonna put everything on. I'm gonna show you guys how to install this wheel bearing. I'm assuming you could probably, you know how to install the rest here, so I'm not gonna record that, but I'll show you how to properly install this wheel bearing. And remember to make sure to put on the backing plate before you install the wheel bearing, because once the wheel bearing's on, you're not gonna be able to take it off without ruining it. Alrighty. Again, guys, if you need to get the control arm or the tie rod on and it's spinning, which it is going to be, take your jack, put it up there, put pressure on it, it'll stop spinning. You'll be able to tighten this to spec. The torque spec on this outer ball joint, I believe, is 48 foot-pounds, and the torque spec on this outer tie rod is, I think, 30 some odd foot-pounds, 38, 35, something like that. Double check it. That's really it. So get it lined up. I've got just kind of a cheap socket and extension here. You're going to want to hit it on the inner race and keep tapping it in. You don't want to hit this outer race because you could damage the bearings. So just keep hitting the inner race. Also make sure you clean the knuckle before you do this. It should go on fairly easily. And just about on there. Sounds bottomed out. Looks good. Smooth operation. Gonna get your nut here. So once the wheel bearing is run up on there, we're gonna want to torque it to spec. The torque spec for the front wheel bearing is 210 foot-pounds. Should be right about there. And that's it. Once that's torqued, make sure it's spinning nice and freely and smoothly, which it is, and you're good to go. Okay. Alright, so once the nut is torqued to spec, it's going to want to redimple this little locking mechanism, this bottom lock collar with the supplied tools. And if your car is driven in the winter often, it's a good idea to put some anti-seize on these threads, especially inside here. To, if you ever want to adjust it, it'll make life a little bit easier. They also do sell some coverings for this. I've seen people use electrical tape, which I might try with this. They just wrap it with electrical tape. It keeps these threads from getting all dirty and grimy and stuff. So if you ever want to make an adjustment, it's a lot easier. This upper spring should be just spinnable on its base. The preload should be set from CAtuned. If in the event you need to take it apart, or maybe something happened where it loosened up, you just want it so that the spring is held in with just a tiny bit of pressure and is still just kind of spinnable on there. Alright guys, so I'm going to show you how to install the rear now. Again, this already has a set of coilovers on it. It's going to be the same whether you have the stock setup or a set of coilovers, though with the stock spring you might end up needing to remove the sway bar link to get the arm extended down enough to pull the spring out, but besides that, it's going to be about the same. So I've got a jack stand underneath the car. I've got this jack under here to hold the arm up. There's a bolt through here, has a 19mm head on it, and then there's two up top. I believe they're 13mm. We're going to start with this one first. And another great tool here is this knuckle buddy. Goes on the back of a wrench to extend it. It's really nice. I know you could use two wrenches, but this is kind of like just easier. It's a little bit nicer. Okay, that's out. And now we're gonna lower the jack a little bit. Alright, that's out. Get this top one out. That's out of there. Now, if you were going for like super low, depending on the spring length you have, you could remove these spring pads to get a little more, get it a little bit lower. But in this case, like I said, this car is not going to be slammed, so I'm going to leave those on. Look up top here. There's two 13mm nuts there. You do have to take off the side panel and stuff like that to access the top of the shock. Just gonna zip those off and put the new one in. Alright, I see here we got the new CAtuned shock mounted up top and loose. We've got the spring here. I don't know if there's a correct upper or bottom for the adjuster. I don't think there is. Someone correct me if I'm wrong here. I like having it on top because you could easily pull this wheel and get to the adjuster, whereas on the bottom you can't. So I'm going to show you now how to properly set the preload here. So I'm going to take the jack, slowly raise it up, try to keep this in place. A little difficult to do with one person, but it's doable. There we go. So as you can see, the spring is okay. So right there, the spring is still just a little loose. I'm gonna go a little bit more. Still a little loose. And we're gonna go just a bit more. There we go. So you want it that the spring is just tensioned in there when the car is at full droop. Go just a bit. There we go. Basically, you want to have it that at full droop, the spring is not going to fall out. So give it a little tension. Still has a little bit of movement there, and that's it. And then we're gonna spin this down. I think that'll do it. That looks about right. Let's see if that's correct. Should be able to thread this bolt in here basically by hand if you have it in the right spot. Seems good. Spin this lock collar all the way down. We're going to grab the tool and tighten it in place in just a second here. Let's tighten up this. Just a spec. This is about 60 foot-pounds we're going to do down here. The ones on top are somewhere about, I think they're at 11 or so foot-pounds. Double check these things, but those numbers are probably close to correct. And that's it for the rear. Going to tighten up this collar and we're done. It's super simple. You don't even have to take a wheel off. With a stock spring, you might need to take the wheel off as there's a lot of spring. And like I said, you might need to remove this lower mount for the sway bar so the arm has full movement. The other thing I want to tell you, if you're installing these coilovers, or any coilovers for that matter, and you're using 30-year-old trailing arm bushings and subframe bushings, and those haven't been changed, then to be honest, you're just wasting your time. Change all your bushings, then do your suspension, or just do everything in one shot. Don't just throw coilovers on a car with blown bushings, because you're really going to get a pretty shitty ride, regardless of if you have, you know, this CAtuned unit or you have, $10,000 set of coilovers. If it's only going to be as good as what it's connected to, if all this stuff is blown, then suspension is not worth it, honestly. Do your bushings, then do your suspension if you had to choose between one or the other. And if you can do both at the same time, then just do it all in one shot.